Hi, guys, and welcome back. I decided to throw this one up after we did the short discussion on beer. I realized there was a lot of information in there that was kind of new for you guys and maybe a little difficult. And I was saying how whiskey and beer are in the same family, so I thought, once again, why not? Let's talk a little about whiskey or Yangju. Yangju itself is extremely popular here in Asia. Japanese have been big fans of whiskey, and so are Koreans. Koreans are more favorited Scotch whiskey, but I guess the Japanese are too. Um, but whiskey is whiskey. It's just its location. Once again, that's another topic. I shouldn't have even mentioned the difference between like American whiskeys, Irish whiskeys, Canadian whiskeys, Scotch whiskeys. Oh, they're all so different, and it's whether they're made from corn or they're made from oats or made from barley or made from rye seeds. There's so many different ways of making uh, whiskeys that it itself is a whole class. But I want to talk about distillation and distillation and stills. The next one's going to be a picture of a still, and I'm using this one only because it kind of looks a little like the traditional Korean style stills. Now, I think you guys seen all of them in museums, and no, not even at grandma's house. I've seen them. Quite a few people have them. I have one. Um, they're still around, the Joseon period stills, kind of like how it looks like in this aspect. Now, this one is obviously a Western styled one, but the Korean still is basically the same thing like this. Where you have a drip spout, you have the bottom part where you put your mash, which is basically your makgeolli if you make it soju, right? And then you have a little, the top area is a dome area where it steams. You boil it, it steams up here. And since alcohol boils at a lower temperature than water, the alcohol boils first and comes out, dripping out here at 100 proof. Very, very, very strong. Um, but this is a good. They're called pot stills. We'll talk about two different types of stills later. But there's a POT, like a Nembe still, which makes sense. No one shot thing. You put it in here, you cook out the alcohol, you clean it out, and you start over again. This particular one has a cooling jacket. You put cold water up here or something like that, which would make it much more efficient. Um, the Korean ones, as far as I know, there's nothing similar to that on there. Pretty self-explanatory. Pretty condensing. To condense something needs to bring it together. And dome is the shape. Cooling water, cooling drain. This is, I guess, you get the cold, warm water out. You add cold water here. You change it every now and then to keep it cold. This is a nice little still, actually. I used the word mash before. Now, I know this looks like a lot of new words and things like that, but it's what I talked about before. And like I said, I really wanted to make sure after I posted the video, I was thinking, I go, well, wait a minute, that was a lot of information without a lot of writing, without a lot of explanation. I was using the term adjunct grains. Once again, Korean beers are made with barley and a lot of rice. Budweiser is made with adjunct grain, meaning rice. Right? So in brewing and distillation, mashing is the process of combining a mix of grains, typically malted barley. You usually start out with malted barley and adjunct grains such as corn, sorghum, rice. Rye is something that you don't see in Korea. And I'm surprised because it is like the main meal of the Middle Ages. People ate it a lot. And you can get it in the West. You can't seem to get it in Korea. Rice, obviously, and wheat. Once again, if you make makgeolli, you're going to use narupa is usually malted wheat. That all together is called the grain bill, and basically that's a recipe. That's the recipe of how to make any kind of, once again, beer or whiskey. We're gonna go into more distillation in this one, but if you're gonna make beer, basically your grain bill is going to be malted barley with adjunct grains and water. Simple enough. Once again, it's the same thing. Mashing allows the enzymes in the malt to break down the starch in the grain into sugar. It's called maltose. Right? You can see the word malt. Toast means sugars, so malt sugar, to create the wort. The wort is that liquid that has all the mash in there. The end product of the mash is called mash. Simple enough. Enzymes, you'll have to look up that word enzyme. I cannot even think. Hyosu, maybe? Hyosu, I think is the term for enzyme. It breaks down the starch in there. And once again, the yeast needs sugar to grow. And it takes the starch and the enzymes make the starch into a sugar. And that will start the fermentation process. Now here's some industrial sized pot stills. This is from a whiskey maker. Once again, the little picture I showed you. I have a 1 liter still at home that I use to distill things. And you can make perfumes. You can make a lot of things from stills. And but these are magnificent. This is from a Jameson whiskey company. So there's a big pot still. And here's a picture of the mash, which once again is grains, water, and malted barley mixed together and basically mashed together. And the liquid is called the wort, and everything together is called the mash. Another picture of the pot stills of Jameson. Things of beauty, that's for sure. Now this is more of a modern style pot still. So 3 chambers, 3 outlets, but still, once again, 1 batch processing. They load it up, they let it ferment, and then they distill it out. Or they add, at that point, they will add the filtered wort into there that's been fermented already, strained, and then cooked out. Here's an illustration of a 16th century alcoholic still set up showing 2 boiling vessels on the bottom, a central column or rectifying column containing cold water, and 2 receiving vessels at the top. Right, this is a pretty complex thing. Here's where the cursor is now. This is the mash that goes in here. This is a cooling channel, and the pipes just go this way. At every step up, it'll be releasing alcohol up there. The reason why I chose this picture is that if you look at it, it looks kind of funny and maybe even comical, but this was science. This was big science at that time. And there's a lot of science did come out of this, that's for sure. Now this is more of a modern one. This is called the column or rectifying still. For this case, we'll just call it a column still because it is shaped like a big, long column. And once again, it has the similar things as a pot still, except that you can continuously, this column here, you can constantly adding fresh wort into this, fermented wort, and these different layers out here come out different proof of alcohol. It never really has to stop. Obviously, something of this size, you have to stop every now and then to clean it. But some of these large industrial ones just run forever without any maintenance or cleaning, because alcohol itself is very clean. Here's a cut through of a column still. The alcohol goes through a series of chambers in the distiller, and in each chamber becomes a little stronger and a little cleaner. It is much less expensive and much more efficient than other types of commercial distillation. Column stills are much cheaper than a pot still, first of all, because it never really stops. It continually runs. And you can hear this is where they add at each stage of fermentation until they get in here, they add the alcohol. And as it distills, these different levels, this is an outlet pipe here, are different levels and different strengths of it. I have a clearer picture about that there. But I think you've seen a lot of these. If you're from Ulsan, you've seen towers like these. Now, they're not making alcohol per se, but they use it for a lot of other purposes. And we'll discuss that a little more because you'd be surprised, from nail polish to car parts to tires to sidewalks, all made through modern distillation through these column stills. The difference between a pot still and a column still, right? Pot stills It's a one batch process. You make it, you mix your grain bill. Once again, this is your recipe. You ferment it, and then you distill it. It's a one batch. After your distillation, you clean it out, and you start over again. Right? It's more expensive to use a pot still, and that's why the better whiskeys still use pot stills, because it generally produces a better type of whiskey, or alcohol in general. I shouldn't say just whiskey, right? But there's less control over it. You have good batches, you have bad batches. Once again, it's a one-shot thing, and your grain bill should be the same every time. But I think you guys know by now, when you're in the kitchen, not everything comes out the same way each time. So pot still's a little risky in that way, right? As opposed to a column still, right? It's continuous distillation. It's not one shot. You could just keep going all day long, all week long, all month long. It doesn't really matter. They require very little maintenance too. Very little cleaning, very little downtime. A pot still, after you use it, you have to let it cool off, open it up. Somebody jumps in there, starts shoveling out all the gunk and crap that's in there. It's clean it out, scrub it out, wash it out, rinse it, start over again. You can see just by that step-by-step process, it is a lot more expensive. But like I said, what you do get a better quality out of it, that's for sure, with a lot less control. Continuous distillation, it's cheaper, and you have more control, more heat, less heat. Once again, as you depending what you're brewing or distilling, you can change the grain bill mid process to change it, because it never ends. And like I said, if you don't think it's really that important, listen here just because this is pretty wild. And once again, I was looking up stills and things like that. This is a fractionation tower, which is basically a column still. What's going on in here is just crude oil from the ground. The furnace heats it up to high temperature. And each layer here, a different product will come out. Right? And here, like car gasoline. This would be gas, like heating and cooking fuel. Same thing we use our stoves. Start making plastic. Here, the gasoline, liquefied LPG, I think you know that term, right? This is where LPG will come out from. Petrochemicals, which everything is made out of. And all the way down to the heavy stuff. Lubricating oil, fuel oil, petroleum jelly, road oil, asphalt, petroleum coke. So once again, this is a continuous still. And once again, the idea, the science behind distillation, it started out making alcohol. And that's why I showed you that kind of funny picture, a woodcut in the Middle Ages, to what we do today. And it's pretty wild, pretty crazy what they produce out of a fractional still or a column still. Okay. Foods used in distillation. Once again, I'm about to get back to. I threw that in just because I thought it was very interesting. But let's talk about things that you can make distilled spirits from. And these foods you can make distilled spirits from. Grains. Once again, earlier in the other video, I used the term cereal, which is another term for it, but I know that I'm sure that you guys are thinking of cornflakes and everything else like that. So I'm using the term grains. Grains and cereal are the same thing. Once again, we talked about rice, oats, barley, and you use oats. Scotch whiskey generally has malted barley with oat because oats grow quite well there, and it's common in their diet. Well, the Scotch whiskey goes pretty far back in history, so they're using what they found locally. We talked about rice, soju, sake, right, which is a distilled rice wine. And I really don't like the term rice wine. Actually, I should change this to beer, only because you're using a grain. And soju is closer to whiskey than it is to wine. And makgeolli is much closer to beer than it is wine. And makgeolli is sometimes called rice wine. And soju is called rice, distilled rice wine. And it doesn't really make much sense because around the world, wine is made from fermented fruit juice. And there's no fruits in this, so I think it's kind of misnamed. I talked a little about rye. You'd have to look it up. Rye whiskey was my father's favorite. Well, I grew up with rye whiskey in the house, and we would have it on cocktails or for special celebrations. Rye is a grain, small, semi-curved grain. If you're interested, look it up. You'll see it. And then wheat. Wheat, once again, is used for making whiskeys. And if you notice, whiskey too has two spellings. This is a Scotch way of spelling whiskey. This is an American way of spelling whiskey. We have an E on there. And Irish whiskey has the same E on there. So American whiskey is more like Irish whiskey from where it's from. It's Scotch whiskey. And if you see that without the E, you're probably getting a Scotch style whiskey. And some people say, I only drink Scotch. And what they mean Scotch whiskey. Fruits and vegetables, right? I think you know tequila, right? Agave fruit, which is like a type of a desert plant that looks very familiar. I think you see that, but that's used in making, particularly in making tequilas, brandies. An American name is called Applejack, right? If you make a distilled liquor from apples, which apples ferment quite well. We used to even make what we called hard cider, as at home, where you take fresh apple juice, not the stuff coming from stores, but fresh squeezed apple juice, and leave that in a cool environment. It will naturally ferment to an alcohol level, probably around 2 to 3%. But growing up, my parents, in the wintertime, because that's when apples, you pick them in the fall, you crush them and you save the juice until the winter, is when it would ferment. And we used to have it warm in the winter when we go like sleigh riding, playing in the snow. You come back and have this hot apple cider, which had a pretty good kick. I mean, 3% is pretty strong when you're a teenager or even younger than that. Grapes, obviously. Grapes make wine, but they do make brandy too. Or eau de vie, grappa. There's quite a lot of distilled alcohol that comes from there. Calvados is the apple brandy cognac, which is actually not on here, is it? Cognac made from apples is called Calvados, which is very nice. Right? Other fruits. There's a whole list of them. There's sweet brandies, cordials, and liqueurs are sweet alcoholic beverages made from just any other fruit that you can name. Name a fruit, there's an alcohol made from it. From oranges to pears to blueberries to strawberries. It's all out there. Probably the most common ingredient made in vodka is potatoes. And somebody told me that a lot of soju is made with potatoes nowadays. And I don't know if that's true. But I know that people have been making sweet potato soju. So probably so. Now, sweeteners and sweetening items. There's a lot out there for not just cane sugar. Cane sugar is the white sugar we use like in the kitchen. Hokusatong, black sugar, that type of thing. That's all cane sugar in that family. And that's not really the best for use. White sugar is not the best use for fermentation because it's too pure. Yes, this yeast will eat it and things like that, but if you're looking for flavor, there's another weird term, congenerics. The flavor in alcohol is called congenerics, whether it's wine or whiskey or anything like that. But basically, the dirtier, the more flavor. So, which I think you understand too, is that like brown sugar has much more flavor than white sugar. I think in Korean cooking, you do prefer brown sugar over white sugar when it comes to adding it to dishes. Mulyat, which itself is malted rice. Mulyat is something I should try practicing fermentating. I just thought of that now. That's an interesting product for that. That might make a nice thing. Something to do this summer. Actually, sometimes not the best time because it's a little too warm. Fermentation has to be controlled, and it's easier to do in the winter because you have warmer spots of the house and colder spots. So once again, but sweetness muliat, that's a real interesting one to think about. Commonly used to make rums. One of my favorite, actually, one of my favorite hard alcohol distilled drinks are rums. That's made with molasses, and molasses is leftovers from sugarcane. Once again, like how white rice was more expensive than brown rice at one time, molasses was the leftovers of the sugarcane production. So it was kind of garbage in a way. They didn't know what to do with it. Poor people ate it, poor people sweetened it type of thing until somebody figured out, well, wait a minute, you ferment that and you're going to have a dark, especially you get a dark rum aged in wood. It's a very, very nice. You can get, sometimes you go to duty-free shops, you can get like 8-year-old rum made in Cuba. In Korea, this is. You can get that here. It's really, really tasty. Honey shows up a lot in cordials and liqueurs. Cordials and liqueurs are strong distilled alcoholic beverages, usually seasoned with, fruits, vegetables, or honey. There's D B and B. You can get that at it's a honey liqueur. You can get that at like Shinsei or anything like that. Botanicals. Now this is a big one. I think you guys are familiar with gin. I'm not sure exactly what you're familiar with when it comes to cocktails type of things. But gin is the most common one. Vermouth is another common one. You make martinis, you need that. They're botanicals means plants. So these are hard alcohol that's seasoned or flavored with herbs and seeds. And there's once again in cordials liqueurs, generally sweetened. Once again with most of the distilled alcohol, besides the big families, there's a lot of sugar in these things, a lot of sweetness because botanicals were considered medicine. Gin itself, gin and vermouth, at one time were considered, like the Hanyak of Western medicine. So they would take these as, as people take medicine today. They became popular because of the alcohol. People like the alcohol, and they started sweetening them up and adding things and adding bubbly seltzer water, and all of a sudden, birth of the cocktail came out. So that's where that comes from. But usually, a lot of distilled stuff, besides being science, I have to really emphasize that. Those old pictures of the distills, that was breaking science. Also, they could start separating things from things, and not just alcohol out of distillation, but they put everything in there. Again, that's where oil with paints and plastic and rubber all comes from. Very, very interesting. Okay. There's so much more, once again, with this as with the other topic of beer. After I was done with the beer, I go, wait a minute, there is this, that. Once again, it's not enough. This is a Western cooking class, and what I'm talking about is basically Western production of alcohol, which does fit into our field. In class week 3 or so, we talked about wine pairing and wines that go with certain types of dishes, which is extremely important for us in the cooking field, especially if you're talking about a small restaurant or a bistro that's going to be serving wine by the glass along with the meals. You're going to have to understand how these things go. Cordials are great. Cordials generally before dinner, and liqueurs are after dinner in general. And liqueur is a British EU term. Same with cordial. But they're basically wonderful things. I said earlier that if you can serve a cordial or you can serve a liqueur after dinner instead of a cake, you're making some money. Or you sell it with the cake. It would be even better. Pairing wines with hot foods is very important in that aspect, that somebody can spend, say, Iman Ochanan on the entree and then Ochanan on a glass of wine. You're going to probably make more money on that glass of wine than you will on the food. Because the food, you have to buy the product, you have to refrigerate it, you have to cut it up, process it, cook it, serve it, throw it out. There's a lot of steps in making an entree. Not only just peeling the potatoes out of it, but cooking it down, making a sauce, all that. So So all of a sudden, Iman Ochana doesn't sound like a lot um, how much work that goes into it, as opposed to Ochana glass of wine. Open the cork, pour it out, and wash the glass. That's all it takes. So that's what's good. I emphasize these things. Look at these additional sales that you could do. Same thing with a liqueur. And a liqueur you get twice as much money for. They're going to be more expensive, of course, but once again, it's the profit's there. And there's so much more. But that's it for today. Once again, I wanted to give you an overview because we did talk about a mash and a wort. I wanted to show you some pictures. And then I got into the distillation, which is very important. Once again, like I said, it's size. And then once again, bringing it back to the kitchen and to our restaurant business that hopefully one of these days you guys are going to be running or owning or anything like that. You look at other forms of sales, and the liquor sales are definitely where it's at. When it especially comes to wine and liqueurs, you can really do a good thing. Okay, thank you very much once again. Hopefully this was something you learned from, and I will see you guys soon. Bye.